Imagine for a moment the desert sky, clear and infinite, where each star seems to tell an ancestral story. It was in this setting that a different light emerged. An unusual glow crossed the skies of ancient Babylon, Persia, and the Arab lands. But this star was not just a celestial wonder. For a few initiates, it represented a spiritual call, a cosmic code encoded, awaited for centuries. The birth of a being whose mission would forever change the fate of humanity. Who were these men capable of deciphering the skies with such spiritual and scientific precision? They were not mere astronomers. They were Magi, initiates, masters of celestial and spiritual arts, guided not by myths, but by truths that transcend time. The Gospel of Matthew simply reports that Magi from the east came to worship the child. But who were these characters really? The term Magi has often been translated as kings, a softening of language that hides something larger. They were not monarchs with crowns and armies. They were representatives of secret spiritual orders, of ancient traditions such as Zoroastrianism, Sabianism, and even esoteric Arab branches. And upon seeing the star, they did not hesitate. They knew that what was being born was not just a prophet, but an incarnation of the Word, a deeply awaited soul. But why would they come from so far away to acknowledge a Jewish baby? The historical context of the time helps us understand. The Middle East, before becoming a stage for wars and divisions, was a sacred crossroad, a space for encounters between cultures, ideas, and mysteries. There, the paths between ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and the Mediterranean intersected. The initiatory schools of the region, although distinct in rituals, shared a common hope: the emergence of an enlightened being who would unite earth and heaven. This expectation was not restricted to the Jewish people. It was a cosmic longing echoing in multiple traditions. In the traditions of pre-Islamic Arabia, there were tribes that guarded secret teachings. Some of them claimed to have received revelations from stars and dreams. Others, like the Sabian lineages, observed the heavens with ritualistic reverence. When the Star of Bethlehem appeared, it did not go unnoticed by these trained eyes. It was the manifestation of an ancient promise, a password activated in the cosmos, signaling the birth of someone capable of carrying not just a message, but a spiritual frequency capable of altering the Earth's energy field. Furthermore, it is crucial to understand that these men were not merely observers. They were active spiritual agents. By setting out towards Jerusalem, they were initiating a sacred ritual of acknowledgement. They knew that their presence at the birth of this being would fulfill a multidimensional prophecy. The acknowledgement was not just symbolic, it was energetic. Their presence anchored a spiritual triad: wisdom, gold, divine connection, incense, and transcendence of death, myrrh. Each of these elements carries a hidden meaning that echoes through the deepest initiatory practices of antiquity. There are records, although rarely discussed, of Eastern spiritual traditions that spoke of the coming of a master in the land of Israel. Some ancient Zoroastrian and Vedic texts allude to a light-bearing figure who would arise in the West and bring balance to the world. These traditions were not confined to cultural or religious boundaries. They understood that spiritual truth manifests in cycles, in different cultures with distinct names, but with a similar essence. When the star shone, the initiates knew that the cycle had restarted. The journey of these Magi was long and fraught with challenges, crossing deserts, avoiding conflicts, escaping political scrutiny. After all, Herod, the reigning king, saw any prophetic birth as a threat. But even in the face of danger, the Magi pressed on. For their calling did not come from the material world. It was internal and inevitable, like the pulsing of an awakened heart. Each step they took was part of a sacred script written beyond time. Upon arriving at the place where Jesus was, they did not just worship the boy, as common translations suggest. They recognized him. This word carries a profound weight. Recognizing someone means already knowing them in some way. In other words, there was a meeting of souls that remembered each other. Jesus, even in his infant form, carried an aura of consciousness that touched anyone who was awake enough. And the Magi, as initiates, were ready to see beyond the veil of flesh. It is possible, even likely, that this meeting marked an invisible turning point in the history of spirituality. It was as if the East and the West had shaken hands at that moment. The ancient knowledge coming from Babylon, Persia, Arabia, and India bowed before the future revelation brought by Jesus. The exchange was silent, symbolic, but transformative. This event, now almost romanticized by Christmas narratives, carries a much broader meaning than we can imagine. It represents a silent pact between spiritual traditions, a lost link in human history. And that's why, when we look at the figure of the Star of Bethlehem, we need to understand that it didn't just guide the Magi, it continues to guide us to this day. An eternal call to awaken, recognize, and remember who we truly are. The popular tradition presents us with the Magi from the East as three kings riding on camels, each bringing a symbolic gift to the newborn Jesus. This image, although beautiful, conceals a much deeper and more powerful truth. When we remove the decorative layers that religious history has added over the centuries, we discover that these men were not kings in the political sense of the word. They were spiritual initiates, masters of occult orders who carried the ancient knowledge transmitted by vanished civilizations. The term mage, from the Greek magoi, derives from the Persian magush, and was originally linked to the priests of the Zoroastrian religion. But even this explanation is superficial when we look at the true depth of the word. The mages were guardians of hidden knowledge, astrologers, alchemists, interpreters of the stars and symbols. They not only observed the sky, but conversed with it. Their schools didn't just teach science, they taught the art of direct connection with the invisible worlds. These initiatory schools were scattered throughout the Middle East and beyond. In Babylon, Chaldean priests mastered astronomical observation techniques that still challenge modern understanding today. In Persia, Zoroastrians revered the sacred fire as a symbol of eternal wisdom. Meanwhile, in Arabia, there were esoteric orders connected to the Sabians, who believed in the spiritual power of celestial bodies. And they all shared something in common: the anticipation of a divine cosmic manifestation, the emergence of an avatar, of a master who would transform the reality of humanity. These men did not come by chance. They were connected by an invisible network of wisdom. They had access to ancient texts, astrological maps, encoded prophecies. Some independent scholars suggest that there were secret manuscripts that spoke of a specific birth at the time of Saturn and Jupiter, when the planets would align at certain points in the sky. This type of wisdom was only accessible to those who mastered the language of the heavens, and the Magi were masters in this field. They knew that stars not only shine, they speak. The canonical historical records offer few clues about the identity of these men. However, apocryphal traditions, Gnostic accounts, and reports from the East provide us with a different perspective. In some ancient versions, the Magi are presented as children of light, heirs of Enoch and Melchizedek. In others, they are described as travelers from secret orders who watched the earth in search of the reincarnation of great souls. There are also indications that one of them was from Ethiopia, another from Persia, and a third from Arabia, uniting different spiritual wisdoms in a single mission: to recognize the light when it incarnated. They did not merely interpret the signs, they were part of the plan. Their arrival was a gesture of spiritual activation, a ceremonial act that sealed the birth of Jesus with the recognition of ancient mysteries. They brought gifts as symbols of initiation, but more than that, they brought the vibrational frequency of the sacred places from which they came. Their presence was a silent yet profound transfer of power. Every step they took towards Bethlehem was guided by purposes far beyond the rational. The Essene traditions, for example, recognize the importance of these Magi. Some Dead Sea Scrolls contain mentions of observers from the east who would come at the appointed time. There are also accounts in Ethiopian literature that speak of a conclave of wise men who would come from the desert in search of the new light. The truth is that these men were representatives of the ancient mystery schools, the same ones that nurtured Moses in Egypt, the prophets in Babylon, and left traces in the pyramids and ziggurats. Furthermore, the Magi were immersed in a culture that did not separate science and spirituality. The study of the heavens was a mystical and mathematical practice. Astrology was a tool for meditation, prediction, and energetic alignment. When they read the planetary conjunction and the stellar movement that indicated the birth of Jesus, they knew that this was not just an astronomical phenomenon, it was a spiritual gateway being opened. This is the key. The Magi understood that the birth of great spiritual beings coincides with specific cosmic moments. They followed the sky maps not out of curiosity, but as sacred tools. The Star of Bethlehem, then, was an astral signature left by higher intelligences, announcing the arrival of a being whose consciousness transcended human limits. And only those with eyes trained by ancestral wisdom could interpret this call. The orders to which the Magi belonged were extremely discreet. Their members were trained for decades before receiving any mission. They were versed in multiple languages, knew myths and symbols from various cultures, practiced silence, fasting, meditation, and deep study. When chosen for this journey, they knew they were not just fulfilling a ritual, they were participating in the turning of a planetary cycle. What catches the eye is that, after the encounter with the boy, the Magi returned by another way, as the biblical text says. But this phrase also carries hidden layers. To return by another way can also mean to return transformed. Those who truly recognize the sacred never return the same. Contact with the Christ consciousness, even at the beginning of its manifestation, already causes an irreversible internal impact. The heart that sees the light never again settles for darkness. Therefore, the Magi were much more than curious visitors. They were living bridges between worlds, silent witnesses to the birth of a new era, men trained in the arts of the invisible, prepared for moments like that one. And by recognizing who they truly were, we realize that the history of humanity is not limited to official books. It pulses in between the lines, in symbols, in the stars, and in the courage of those who dare to remember. Long before the Gospels recorded the birth of Jesus, and millennia before the establishment of Christianity as an organized religion, various Eastern traditions were already speaking about the coming of an extraordinary being. Prophecies that did not belong to Judaism, nor to the West, pointed to an avatar of light, a universal master who would appear at the right time to balance the world and usher in a new spiritual era. These records, found in cultures such as the Zoroastrian, Hindu, Buddhist, and Sabian, do not mention the name Jesus, but describe his spiritual qualities, mission, and impact with astonishing symbolic accuracy. In Zoroastrianism, an ancient religion of Persia, we find the figure of Saoshyant, a savior of the world, who would be born of a virgin and would come to purify the earth, restoring cosmic order. His birth would be preceded by celestial signs, and his coming would bring an end to spiritual darkness. The similarity with the Christian account is so evident that many scholars consider this one of the symbolic roots of Western messianism itself. The Magi, originating from these traditions, knew that the stars carried messages, and the planetary conjunction observed by them seemed to accurately fulfill the prediction of the oldest Zoroastrian texts. But the connections don't stop there. In the Vedas of India, there are mentions of a divine Purusha, the cosmic being who would manifest among men to re-establish Dharma, the sacred order. In the Bhagavata Purana, we find the expectation of Kalki, the last avatar of Vishnu, who would come at the end of a dark age, Kali Yuga, riding a white horse and bringing with him the restoration of truth. Some Hindu occult schools interpret this cycle in a non-literal way, stating that intermediate manifestations of Vishnu occur whenever humanity reaches a critical point. And many of these spiritual masters came from the West, including Jesus, whom they call Isha in some texts. Among the Buddhists of the Himalayas and Tibet, there are accounts pointing to an enlightened master from the West who would manifest with the compassionate heart of Avalokiteshvara and the inner power of an awakened bodhisattva. Some ancient Tibetan manuscripts, kept in remote monasteries, mention a man of light with fair skin, bright eyes, and a healing voice, who would bring men direct knowledge of the Father in heaven. These documents, often overlooked by the Western academic world, reinforce the idea that the birth and mission of Jesus were anticipated by various cultures that never had direct contact with Judaism. Another fascinating point lies in the Sabian traditions of Arabia and Mesopotamia. These spiritual schools, based on sacred astronomy and the cycles of time, claimed that with each major astrological conjunction, an avatar of light would descend to Earth. Born in humble circumstances, this being would carry a vibration capable of reorganizing the collective unconscious. For these people, the appearance of the Star of Bethlehem was the visual and mathematical confirmation that this being had arrived. It was not just a child, but a living frequency incarnate whose cosmic vibration would alter the axis of the spiritual world. And we cannot forget the late Egyptian tradition, where priests from Heliopolis spoke of a son of the sun, who would be born abroad and teach men to walk again on the path of Ma'at, cosmic justice. The Egyptians viewed time as cyclical and awaited the return of an embodied solar principle. For some initiates, Jesus was the personification of Horus in the final cycle, bringing not only moral renewal, but the reconnection between the spirit and the cosmos. What makes all of this even more impressive is that these traditions were separated by thousands of kilometers, different languages and symbols, but they spoke of the same essence, a being that would come to unify heaven and earth. When the Star of Bethlehem appeared, it did not just illuminate the skies, it activated dormant memories. For the Eastern initiates, this was not a surprise. It was the confirmation of ancient knowledge preserved for centuries in temples, caves, and sacred libraries. This star, to them, was like a vibrational signature, a visible cosmic seal, and it did not appear randomly. The Magi were waiting for it because they followed a millennial spiritual calendar based on celestial configurations that indicated incarnation portals of great souls. Just as we recognize eclipses or solstices today, the initiates of the past knew exactly when a new consciousness would emerge on the physical plane. The star, then, was the final sign, the call for them to go out and meet the promise. More than a physical sign, this celestial light also carried an energetic power. Various mystical accounts, from Sufi, Gnostic, and Vedanta schools, assert that certain celestial alignments create vibrational doors through which elevated consciousness can incarnate without being corrupted by the densities of the material plane. The Star of Bethlehem, from this perspective, was not just what guided the Magi to Jesus. It was the very channel through which the essence of Christ entered the world. These prophecies were not just for predicting events. They were tools for inner preparation. The initiatory schools knew that to recognize a being of light, one needs to be vibrationally attuned to it. Therefore, the Magi came prepared spiritually, physically, and mentally. They were not going to meet a religious savior, but a living mirror of universal consciousness. Recognizing Jesus was, for them, recognizing the inner Christ, the same one their masters always said exists in every awakened human being. The silence of Western records on this convergence of prophecies is curious, but understandable. Accepting that the birth of Jesus was awaited by non-Jewish cultures would require rethinking the boundaries of what is understood as divine revelation. It would mean admitting that spiritual wisdom is universal, timeless, and does not belong to a specific religion. By reconnecting these threads, we understand that Jesus did not come only for one people. He came in response to a collective call of the human soul. And today, as we revisit these forgotten prophecies, we are invited to do the same as the Magi, to look within our inner sky and recognize the signs. The story of Christ is not a narrative frozen in time. It is a living journey that continues to reverberate in every sincere seeker. Because true recognition is not in the eyes, but in the spirit. And those who seek it with an open heart will see it, just as the ancient Magi from the East saw it over 2,000 years ago. The Bible is largely silent about the period from Jesus' 12th to 30th years. This nearly two-decade gap is known by scholars as the lost years of Jesus. But for initiates and seekers of the hidden path, these years are not lost. They are protected. Hidden in the lines of history, preserved by oral traditions, alternative records, and echoes in the deserts that connect Judea to Egypt, Arabia, and even India. In this empty space of the official narrative, we find fertile ground to understand the true spiritual formation of the one who would come to be known as Christ. After the temple episode at the age of 12, where Jesus impresses the scholars with his wisdom, the sacred text simply jumps to his baptism by John when he was already about 30 years old. But what happened in this gap? Esoteric tradition suggests that he was not inactive. On the contrary, this was the period of his greatest internal preparation. And the desert, arid, silent, brutally real, was both the physical and symbolic setting of this transformation. The Arabian desert, in particular, has been a stage for spiritual retreats since time immemorial. It was known to harbor secret schools, orders of mystics, initiatory caravans that crossed the dunes carrying not only spices and gold, but also ancestral wisdom. Among these traditions were the Sabaeans, descendants of the stellar priests of Chaldea, and the Nabateans, guardians of Petra, a city carved in stone and protected by profound spiritual codes. For those who knew where to look, the desert was a living library of forgotten teachings. Various traditions claim that Jesus, accompanied by discreet caravans or itinerant teachers, ventured into Arabia where he encountered knowledge that combined astrology, energy medicine, sacred geometry, and deep purification practices. Some independent scholars link Jesus to the Essenes, a community on the fringes of the official religious system, but other sources suggest that he may have crossed the borders of Palestine and been welcomed by early Sufi masters, and even by groups descended from the initiated Egyptians who fled to the desert after Greek domination. In Arabia, there are oral records among ancient Bedouins that speak of a young man with fair skin and fiery eyes, who passed among the tribes and healed with only his gaze and hands. He was called Isha, an Arabic name that many scholars link to the Eastern version of Jesus. The Sufi tradition also tells of a son of silence who came from the west to learn the secrets of the desert, and then disappeared, taking with him the highest teachings. For these people, he was not just a prophet, he was a pilgrim of a cosmic soul. Egypt also follows this path. Shortly after birth, Joseph and Mary fled there, escaping from Herod's persecution. And many believe that this stay was neither brief nor superficial. Egypt was, for millennia, the heart of mysteries. The city of Heliopolis, where the Eye of Horus and the solar cycles were once studied, still vibrated with echoes of ancient knowledge. Could Jesus have been initiated into Egyptian traditions? There is no way to confirm with documents, but the symbolic pattern of his teachings, parables, metaphors, use of the numbers 3, 7, and 12, resonates intensely with Hermetic symbolism. Another fascinating point lies in the practice of retreating into caves and the ritual use of solitude. In the deserts of Arabia and Sinai, monks and ascetics would isolate themselves in search of a direct connection with the divine, far from the distractions of the world. Jesus, years later, would also retreat for 40 days in the desert before beginning his public ministry. Could this retreat be a repetition of a pattern already experienced? It is possible that he was consciously reliving the initiation structure experienced during the hidden years, when he underwent silent trials that left no material records, but deeply shaped his being. Desert schools didn't just offer intellectual knowledge. They created masters of the unseen. They taught how to see with the eye of the soul, to heal with energy, to enter altered states of consciousness without the use of substances. Many of the miracles attributed to Jesus, such as healings, materializations, control over the elements, are, to the initiated, clear signs of mastery over spiritual laws learned in the secret orders of the desert. It is at this point that a powerful perception arises. Jesus did not come to deny the East, but to absorb it. He did not found a new religion from scratch. He alchemized the lived and filtered traditions over these hidden years, and brought to the surface a simplified, direct, and at the same time universal wisdom. Those words spoken in the mountains of Galilee echoed secrets from the Arabian dunes, the Egyptian temples, the initiatory caves of deep Arabia. Furthermore, contact with the desert peoples may have influenced Jesus' own pedagogy. The use of parables, for example, was common among Arab and Sufi masters. The simple wisdom, yet laden with deep layers, was a way of teaching that accessed both the intellect and the heart. The way Jesus spoke of the kingdom of heaven as something internal, present, vibrational, exactly reflects the spirit of the desert schools, which taught that the divine dwells at the center of being, and that only silence can reveal it. In this way, when we consider the real possibility that Jesus may have walked through the deserts of Arabia and Egypt in his hidden years, we gain a new perspective. He was not just a son of God with innate wisdom. He was a pilgrim of the Spirit, someone who allowed himself to be shaped by the world's oldest traditions, and who transcended them, not rejecting them, but revealing their purest essence. And perhaps that's why the desert never left him. Even in his public life, Jesus returned to the desolate places. He sought silence, starry nights, the fertile emptiness where the soul meets God. Because there, in the warm winds of Arabia, in the vast skies of Sinai, and in the sacred sands of Egypt, he had received the invisible keys that would unlock his mission as Christ. The Gospels offer us only a glimpse of Jesus' teachings, parables, speeches, and miracles, fragments of a broader wisdom. However, initiates throughout history recognize in these gestures and words a coded language. Hidden behind the simplicity of the parables is an ancient initiatory structure, passed down orally from master to disciple, by spiritual lineages that predate recorded history itself. Jesus not only knew this language, he taught through it, adapting the ancestral codes to the hungry souls of his time. During the years of silence, the hidden years, Jesus had direct contact with mystery schools scattered throughout Egypt, Arabia, Persia, and even India. These schools did not teach dogmas, but universal laws. The correspondence between the micro and macrocosm, internal transmutation, the 7 planes of existence, the power of the word, the conscious use of vital energy. It was not religion, it was living spiritual science, and Jesus absorbed, filtered, and redefined this knowledge to make it accessible to people's hearts. Among the central principles of these teachings was the idea that the human being is a mirror of the cosmos. The phrase, "the kingdom of God is within you," was not just a beautiful metaphor. It was a profound esoteric statement. The initiates knew that the human body, its energetic and emotional structure, is an exact reflection of the universe's structure. This view is common in traditions such as Egyptian Hermeticism, Tantric Yoga, and mystical Zoroastrianism, all with roots in the lands where Jesus may have passed. He didn't teach moralism. He pointed to the awakening of the Christ consciousness within each one. Another revealing point lies in the way Jesus treated miracles. For the common eye, they were demonstrations of power. For the initiate, they were demonstrations of mastery over invisible spiritual laws. Turning water into wine, multiplying food, healing from a distance, calming storms. All of this is perfectly aligned with alchemical teachings, with practices of vibrational manipulation, and with the principles of dominated mental energy. None of this was magic. It was applied spiritual science, mastered by those who went through the hidden stages of initiation. The parallels with Egyptian traditions are abundant. The ancient priests of Thoth, the Hermes Trismegistus, spoke of the importance of the word as a creative vibration. Jesus, in his healings, often merely said, "Rise, be healed, go and sin no more." The use of the verb as a force of transmutation is one of the pillars of the Hermetic tradition. For the Egyptians, sound was a bridge between planes. Jesus would speak, and the universe would respond. This was not due to an innate divine title, but to the deep alignment with the universal law that he achieved during his years of hidden learning. There are also echoes of the Vedanta tradition. The concept of Atman, the divine self, reflected in Jesus is evident when he says, "I and the Father are one." But notice, this phrase in the initiatory tradition does not exclude anyone. On the contrary, it points to the possibility of all beings achieving this union. Jesus, as an initiate, did not come to place himself above. He came to show what everyone is in essence when they awaken. This is aligned with the teachings of the great Eastern masters who also spoke of the dissolution of the ego to reveal the eternal self. The fasting, meditation, and silence practices that Jesus cultivated are also inheritances from these hidden schools. The 40-day retreat in the desert wasn't just symbolic preparation, it was a rite of passage, common among initiates of the Middle East. The number 40 represents in esoteric numerology the complete cycle of inner death and rebirth. During this process, the initiate confronts their shadows, purifies the subtle bodies, and emerges with the clarity necessary to fulfill their mission. Jesus repeated this pattern and emerged from the desert ready to manifest the Christ. Another fascinating aspect are the indirect references Jesus makes to the laws of karma and reincarnation. In John 9, when healing a man born blind, his disciples ask, "Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" This question presupposes the idea of past lives. Jesus does not correct this premise. He simply responds that the condition existed so that the works of God might be displayed in him. It's a coded statement, typical of a master who knows he is before an audience not yet ready for the whole truth, but who recognizes the laws of the cycle of cause and effect. Jesus also taught through initiatory symbols, many of which come from ancient schools. The use of the cross, for example, long before it became a symbol of death, represented the intersection of the vertical and horizontal planes, spirit and matter. The fish, the bread, the wine, all archetypal symbols used in Egyptian and Chaldean rituals. Even baptism, a central practice of his predecessor John, has roots in spiritual rebirth rituals from the mysteries of Isis and Mithras. Jesus did not come to invent, he came to remember, reorganize, and reveal with universal love. For the initiated, what Jesus did was revolutionary, not because it was new, but because he made accessible what was previously reserved for a few. He broke the cycle of spiritual elites and handed the keys to those who were ready to receive. His speeches always required internal effort. He didn't provide formulas, but clues. Each parable was a tool for consciousness activation. And those with eyes to see and ears to hear realized they were in the presence of someone who spoke the language of the stars with the accent of compassion. That's why the initiates from the East recognized him. They didn't just see the man, nor did they seek miracles. They felt the vibration of truth, because it was the same one they had studied in their temples, meditated on in their caves, and intuited under the stars. Jesus was the living embodiment of the principles they revered, and seeing him teach, walk, love, and be silent, they recognized in him not just a brother, but a master who had achieved the highest realization. At the core, the hidden teachings that Jesus revealed remain alive. They have not been lost. They have merely been obscured by layers of interpretation, fear, and institutionalization. But those who seek with a sincere heart still find them. They live in the words that resonate beyond the letter, in the gestures that heal beyond the touch, and in the profound silence where the inner Christ still whispers, "Follow me." Throughout the centuries, Arabia has been depicted in the Western imagination as a barren and isolated land, a space between civilizations. However, for those who see beyond appearances and walk the spiritual paths, ancient Arabia was much more, an invisible center of spiritual convergence, where the sacred flowed through the caravan routes, the chants of the tribes, and the practices of the initiated. To understand the silent impact of Arabia on Jesus and the Magi from the East, it is necessary to reconstruct this forgotten geography, not with maps, but with spiritual memory. Historically, the Arabian Peninsula was the meeting point of three great spiritual powers: Egypt to the west, Mesopotamia to the north, and India to the east. Not coincidentally, its main trade routes, such as the incense route, transported not only myrrh, spices, and precious stones. They carried hidden knowledge, sacred symbols, ancient mantras, astral rituals. Wandering monks, alchemists, priests disguised as merchants. Many of those who traversed these trails were transmitters of knowledge, bearers of light in human form. At the heart of these routes was Petra, the jewel of the Nabateans, a mysterious people whose origin still intrigues archaeologists. Petra was not just an urban center of monumental beauty, it was an initiatory center, carefully carved to resonate with the Earth's energetic flows. Its temples, aligned with specific constellations, functioned as vibrational portals. The priests of Petra mastered the art of sacred geometry and celestial observation, and many accounts indicate that pilgrims sought there spiritual purification and preparation for profound rituals. Jesus, in his hidden years, is believed to have passed through these lands, and his contact with Arab and Sabaean masters may have revealed to him the deeper dimensions of the human energy body, the vibration of the word, and the flow of solar energy in the nervous system, teachings also preserved in the Vedic and Hermetic texts. These practices were not random. They formed the core of initiatory training, shaping the being before any public revelation. The silence of Arabia was the ideal setting for this spiritual refinement. But Arabia was also the cradle of nomadic peoples with a refined spiritual tradition. Tribes that spoke with the stars, that performed lunar rituals, that recognized the vibration of certain crystals as bearers of healing and wisdom. These traditions were passed down orally, protected by the veil of anonymity. They were knowledges that did not seek temples or applause. They lived in the breath, in the gaze, in the touch of the sand. These peoples recognized the arrival of special beings by the movement of the winds, by collective dreams, by the signs of the sky. They did not need written prophets, they felt. And it was in this environment that the Magi from the East were formed and circulated. Many of them belonged to orders that mixed astrology, alchemy, numerology, and contemplative practices. Others were direct heirs of the Chaldeans, who dominated astronomical knowledge with a spiritual precision that still astonishes scholars today. For them, the birth of a soul like Jesus was announced centuries in advance by carefully mapped celestial cycles. The sky was their sacred book, and Arabia was the point where the portal to decipher it opened. The very tradition of incense, so common in the accounts of Jesus' birth, originates in the mountains of southern Arabia, mainly in present-day Oman and Yemen. The use of frankincense and myrrh was not merely symbolic, it was medicinal, energetic, and ceremonial. These elements were used to alter states of consciousness, prepare environments for the manifestation of the sacred, and purify energetic fields. Not coincidentally, these were the gifts given to the boy, not as decorative offerings, but as tools for spiritual activation. Arabia also housed schools linked to Sabaean knowledge, one of the oldest traditions of celestial worship. Its members practiced rituals of star observation in absolute silence, seeking to capture messages encoded in the movement of the celestial bodies. The belief was that certain souls were like incarnate stars, and when these souls emerged, they altered the very frequency of time and space. For the Sabaeans, Jesus was exactly this, a living star among men. They recognized him not by his deeds, but by his frequency. Jesus' contact with these orders would also explain the emphasis of his teachings on direct experience with the divine, without the need for intermediaries. This was a basic principle of the initiatory schools of Arabia. God dwells in the breath of the silent man. This vision echoes in his words, "When you pray, go into your room, close the door and pray in secret." He did not teach about grand temples. He taught about the inner temple, the secret dwelling of the Most High that vibrates in every awakened human being. The desert in this context is more than geography. It's a living metaphor of the soul in search of the essential. Arabia did not offer distractions. It offered space for the spirit to speak. Its masters understood the power of absence, fasting, and retreat. And it is in this fertile void that great souls were prepared. Jesus, shaped by this silence, later knew how to silence the ego of the crowds and activate the spirit in each encounter. What he experienced there, among dunes and stars, was not a course. It was a cosmic spiritual gestation. Therefore, when he returned to Judea, he was a changed man. He spoke with an authority that no one understood. He had a gleam in his eyes that confused the powerful. He taught as one who had seen God face to face, and indeed he had. Because the path of initiation had led him to the invisible center of Arabia, where the spirit is forged by the fire of presence. In this sense, Arabia was not a supporting player in the story of Jesus. It was the initiatory womb that helped to gestate Christ. And understanding this is to recover one of the lost threads of humanity's spiritual web. Because there, among the hot winds and the cold nights of the desert, the call of the masters still echoes, the ancient songs still resonate. And for those who dare to listen, the path is still open. Few episodes in the spiritual history of humanity are as laden with symbolism as the moment when the Magi, after a long journey, find the baby Jesus and offer him 3 gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. At first glance, these elements might seem like honorary gestures, as if they were simply acknowledging the importance of a royal or religious figure. But for those with eyes to see, this act represents a transfer of ancient knowledge and the consecration of a sacred initiatory lineage. Each gift is a key, each element a vibrational frequency, and together they form a spiritual legacy that echoes to this day. Gold has always been a symbol of royalty, but for those initiated, it represents something even higher: solar consciousness, the radiance of the spirit in its awakened state. In alchemy, gold symbolizes the ultimate goal of transmutation, the purified human being, aligned with the divine, vibrating at the frequency of Christ. Offering gold to Jesus was not just acknowledging his external royalty, it was affirming his mission as the spokesperson of the supreme light. It was to silently say, "You are the living manifestation of the spiritual sun." Moreover, they were there passing on to him the symbol of spiritual sovereignty, which placed him not only above the kings of earth, but in tune with the vibrant heart of the cosmos. Incense, in turn, has been used for millennia in spiritual traditions all over the world. Its fragrance uplifts, purifies, connects. When it burns, incense creates a bridge between the visible and the invisible world. In the ritual of the Magi, incense represents conscious divine connection, the link between the human plane and higher dimensions. Offering it to Jesus was to acknowledge that he was not just a bearer of wisdom, he was a direct channel with the Father, a living altar, a bridge between worlds. In the initiatory tradition, incense also represents the element of air, the breath, the word, the revelation. Jesus would later become the Word incarnate. The gift anticipated what he would manifest with his teachings, the living breath of God among men. The myrrh is perhaps the most enigmatic gift, and paradoxically, the deepest. Used since ancient times in embalming processes and rites of passage, myrrh carries with it the symbolism of initiatory death and transcendence. It is a balm of purification, of preserving the essence, of contact with the eternal. By offering myrrh to a newborn, the Magi were saying, "You were born to die, but your death will not be the end. It will be a portal." In initiatory terms, myrrh represents the transmuted earth element, the physical body that goes through death and resurfaces in glory. It was indeed a silent seal on Jesus' future, the recognition of his sacrificial and redemptive mission. These three gifts together form the triad of the great spiritual work: gold as the expression of the spirit, incense as a connection with the soul, myrrh as the transmutation of the body, spirit, soul, and body, elevated, purified, and unified. This is the structure of every true initiatory journey. The Magi, by delivering these items, sealed the totality of the Christic mission, not only for Jesus, but for all of humanity that would come to be touched by his presence. And more, there is also a correspondence with the three internal power centers, known in many traditions as the three sacred fires. Gold corresponds to the upper center, the crown, the chakra of wisdom. Incense vibrates in the heart center, the bridge of love and compassion. Myrrh descends to the grounding center, where the transmutation of matter occurs. When these centers are activated together, the truly awakened being is born, the one who thinks with light, feels with spirit, and acts with divine purpose. There are still apocryphal and esoteric records suggesting that these gifts were not merely physical objects, but energized ceremonial instruments. There are indications that the gold originated from secret solar temples, that the incense came from the sacred mountains of Oman, where the air carries a distinct frequency, and that the myrrh was consecrated by priestesses from southern Arabia. Each of these items, therefore, had its own initiatory history and carried with it centuries of consecration and accumulated power. When offered to Jesus, these elements not only recognized, they activated. This gesture of the Magi also reveals a deep wisdom about the art of serving the sacred. They did not come to ask for blessings, they did not beg for favors, nor did they demand signs. They came to give. This attitude is the deepest silent teaching. Recognizing the divine is to donate, consecrate, offer what is most pure and essential. The gold of one's own essence, the incense of one's own prayer, the myrrh of one's own surrender. It is the opposite of the modern spiritual ego. The Magi went to meet the light not to receive, but to offer themselves. The most impressive thing, however, is that this triad still lives. It is present in all sincere seekers. Whenever someone awakens their spirit, gold, aligns their heart with the divine, incense, and fully commits their body and soul to the journey, myrrh, they repeat the gesture of the Magi before the inner Christ. Every human being is called to repeat this rite, not just on religious dates, but every day, in the presence of their own inner light. The legacy of the Magi, then, is not just in the story told, it's within us. They represent the path of recognition, humility, and silent wisdom. They knew what few know, that when a being of light incarnates, one should not worship it with words. One should honor it with presence, reverence, and genuine offering. And so, in that moment almost hidden in the biblical narrative, something much bigger happened. 3 wise men offered eternal symbols to a boy who had not yet spoken a public word. And in that silent gesture, the universe understood that the cycle had been sealed, the light had been recognized, the Christ was anchored, and the world, even unknowingly, would never be the same again. When observing the vastness of accounts, records, and traditions pointing towards a Jesus deeply connected to the spiritual schools of the East and the Arabian desert, an inevitable question arises. Why do these pieces of information barely appear in the canonical Gospels or in dominant theology? How is it possible that one of the most influential figures in history, has almost 20 years of his life completely erased from official records. The silence here is not innocent. It is calculated, orchestrated, and has roots that plunge deeply into the power construction of religious history. To understand this, it is necessary to go back to the beginning of institutionalized Christianity. In the first centuries after the death of Jesus, what existed was a multitude of groups: Essenes, Gnostics, Jewish Christians, Hellenistic Christians, each with their own interpretations of Christ's message. Many of these factions preserved the initiatory elements of the tradition, recognized the multiplicity of lives, the presence of the divine within each human being, and the connection between Jesus and the ancient schools. But when the Roman Empire appropriated Christianity, this diversity became a threat. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD was a landmark in this transition. There, it was defined what was permissible to believe. There, they chose which Gospels would be considered true and which ones would be condemned to oblivion. Gospels that spoke of a Jesus who taught the evolution of the soul, the awakening of consciousness, the unity among religions, and the connection with the East were discarded, labeled as heretical, and banned. The texts that pointed to a cosmic Christ, a master of initiation, were replaced by dogmatic narratives centered on sin, salvation, and ecclesiastical hierarchy. It wasn't a mistake, it was a strategy. A mystical Jesus, connected with the Magi of the East, with Egyptian schools, with Sufi and Vedanta traditions, could not be controlled. This Jesus invited each human being to find God within themselves, to walk their own path, to break away from external authorities. This was dangerous for an empire that wanted control, submission, and order. An institutional Jesus was needed, one who would bless kings, churches, and hierarchies. The true Christ, free, radiant, and universal, needed to be silenced. And so it was done. Libraries were burned, manuscripts buried, monks persecuted, and a new Christianity was erected, not as an initiatory path, but as a power structure. Those who spoke of Jesus' connection with traditions such as Zoroastrianism, Hermeticism, and Hinduism were eliminated or marginalized. The narrative was reduced, simplified, brutalized. The divine logos was turned into a static idol. The living word was transformed into frozen dogma. Even the episode of the Magi was diluted. From initiates, they were demoted to kings. From representatives of the mystery schools, they became extras in a nativity scene. The symbolic gifts turned into props. And the cosmic encounter, which represented the fusion between East and West, between ancient wisdom and spiritual revelation, was reduced to a childish scene. The vibrational power of this moment was neutralized, and its meaning forgotten. But the erasure did not stop at the texts. It extended to art, liturgy, catechesis. The following centuries would be marked by a systematic silencing of Jesus' deep spiritual dimension. Mystics were persecuted, Gnostics were exterminated, Sufis were pushed to the margins. Indigenous and Eastern traditions were ridiculed or demonized. Everything that reminded us that the divine dwells within humans and that there is a personal path to awakening was repressed. The result of this is an amputated spirituality, an institutionalized Christ who speaks about future salvation but little about present transformation, a Jesus who is worshipped on altars but little understood in essence. Humanity has been conditioned to look to the sky awaiting a return, while the inner Christ was suffocated in silence. The same silence that covered his youth also covered the memory of what he really came to teach. However, the truth does not die, it hides, and it always comes back when the time is ripe. Manuscripts began to reappear, like those found in Nag Hammadi and Qumran, revealing a deeply esoteric, liberating, and initiatory Jesus. Eastern traditions began to open their doors and recognize that Christ is a living presence in the heart of every awakened soul. Archaeology, comparative spirituality, deep psychology, All these areas began to rebuild the bridge that had been destroyed. Today, we know that the silence of history is not synonymous with non-existence. Often, it is the protection of something sacred against desecration. The lost years of Jesus are not empty. They are full of revelations. And these revelations are beginning to emerge. The veil is lifting, and with it, the ancient knowledge re-emerges, showing that Christ is not the property of any religion. He is a living archetype, a universal energy, a consciousness that pulses in every being who seeks the truth with an open heart. And here is the final key. What was hidden was not just a part of a man's biography. It was the possibility of all humanity remembering who they truly are. Because Jesus' most dangerous teaching, and therefore the most silenced, was this: "You are gods. Do the works that I do, and even greater ones." This sentence, left almost without comment by traditional theology, is the seed of a spiritual revolution. A revolution that begins not outside, but within. When we look back and contemplate the magnitude of what was silenced, the meeting of the Magi with Jesus, the Eastern prophecies, the hidden years, and the initiatory transmission, it's impossible not to wonder, why are these truths resurfacing just now? Why, after 2 millennia of concealment, is the world talking again about a mystical, multidimensional, universal Jesus? The answer lies in the time we live in. We are in an era of global spiritual transition, and these revelations are not random. They are part of a collective call to remember who we truly are. The same sky that shone with the Star of Bethlehem today emits new signals. And just like the Magi from the East, we are invited to look up and decipher the codes. But now the stars do not guide bodies, but consciousness. The Star of Bethlehem is no longer just in the firmament. It pulses in the heart center of every human being who feels the desire to return to their inner home. The birth of Christ is no longer about a boy in a manger, but about the emergence of the internal Christ within each of us. When the Magi recognized the light in Jesus, they were showing a path. That gesture, silent and sacred, is a mirror for every seeker today. In other words, whoever recognizes the light today is also being called to become a bearer of it. No longer as a follower, but as a living expression. True recognition is what transforms, and this process is underway within millions of people around the world. People who no longer fit into the boxes of formal religion, but also do not want the emptiness of materialism. People who feel the call of the sacred in silence, in the sky, in the inner desert. The living message of Jesus was clear: the kingdom of God is within you. And this is not a poetic metaphor, it's an internal map, a vibrational truth. We are being called to set aside intermediaries, dogmas, systems of guilt and fear, and walk towards our own divine nature, just as he did. The Magi not only recognized Christ, they initiated a cycle that now, in this era, reaches its climax. The East and the West are no longer geographies. They are metaphors for the integration of masculine and feminine, of mind and heart, of science and spirit. Each element of this hidden legacy points to a greater reunion, that of each human being with their spiritual essence. That's why so many ancestral traditions are returning. That's why the interest in sacred astrology, alchemy, meditation, sacred geometry resurfaces with such strength, because these are the tools of the initiates, and now they are once again available, no longer hidden, but open to all who seek with sincerity and courage. What was once exclusive to secret orders, today pulses in networks, in books, in the spontaneous mystical experiences that so many are living. The wisdom that shaped Jesus during his hidden years has not been lost. It was silently sown, waiting for the time of harvest. And this time is now. Those who were once invisible disciples today become guides, therapists, channelers, educators of the new consciousness. The living Christ manifests in compassion, in clarity, in boundless love, in conscious action. This is the true legacy of the Magi. not only having recognized the light, but also having initiated a cycle of awakening that spans centuries. A cycle that now blossoms amidst the collapse of old systems. We are witnessing the end of a world based on fear and separation, and the birth of a new world that recognizes the divine as something intimate, present, and accessible. This new world will not be imposed from the outside. It will be built by each individual who dares to recognize the Christ within themselves. And no matter how much the system tries to silence, control, disinform, consciousness is uncontrollable. The Spirit blows where it wants, and it's blowing strong now. That's why everything is coming to light. Manuscripts, memories, synchronicities, dreams, impulses. It's as if the earth itself is helping its children remember. And this memory is not just historical. It's spiritual, cellular, vibrational. We are being realigned again with the original purpose, to live as divine beings incarnated, connected to the whole, aware of our stellar origin. In this scenario, Jesus ceases to be just a distant figure and becomes an archetypal model of full consciousness. The Magi, in turn, become symbols of the modern seeker, one who travels within and without, who follows the signs, who offers their essence to truth. And the gifts, they are still given, but now in different forms. The gold of awakened wisdom, the incense of conscious presence, the myrrh of loving surrender to the soul's purpose. The cycle closes, but it doesn't end. It renews itself. Just like the star that guided them, there is a light guiding all those who feel the call, even if they don't yet know how to name it. The world doesn't need more religion. It needs more awareness. And that's what the true teaching of Jesus offers. He didn't come to establish stone temples, but to awaken living temples in every human heart. Now the invitation is simple and eternal. Recognize the light, follow the star, and become what you have always been, but forgot. One with the source, one with Christ, one with the whole. Mind Unfettered. Now that you've journeyed this millennial path with me, I want to invite you to be part of the conscious manifestation of this forgotten truth. What does this hidden legacy of the Eastern Magi awaken in you? Do you feel there is something in your personal history that resonates with this inner call? Share in the comments which symbol, teaching, or part of this revelation touched your heart most deeply. Don't underestimate the power of what you write. Every sincere comment is an energetic seed planted in the collective field. Let's manifest together as a brotherhood of seekers who acknowledge that Christ lives not only in history, but within each one of us. This space is more than just a channel. It's an expanding vibrational temple. You too can be one of the modern Magi. Comment, reflect, take a stand, activate the current of silent wisdom. And pay attention. Mind Unfettered. If this journey has opened your eyes to truths that were dormant, you need to watch the next video that is already on your screen now. The Brotherhood of Light. The secret knowledge of Jesus that history erased. In this next deep dive, we will decipher the hidden lineages, the initiatory schools, and the manuscripts that silently preserved the true spiritual mission of Jesus that the world did not know. Turn on notifications, subscribe if you haven't done so yet, and walk with us on this road of awakening. Because here at Mind Unfettered, there's no turning back, only expansion.